This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. And welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Monday edition of the show. Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. Also, of course, a big shout out to everyone listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. Make sure you continue to tell your friends, your family, your neighbors, anybody that is interested in agriculture. This is a welcoming community, and it's great to have you here. The more the merrier. Our audience continues to increase, and we appreciate everybody making us, like I said, a big part of your workday. Well, hey, today it's Agronomic Monday, so we're gonna really dig into some agronomic issues, some good stuff. We got Eastern Canada, Western Canada content, and we can learn from all of it, no matter where you are farming. And make sure you send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, with some of those harvest yields as you're, plucking along in the combine. Maybe you're driving the grain cart or you're on the truck. Take your time and send us a message. Let us know how things are going. And of course, the Thursday show is the Farmer Rapid Fire, where we talk to farmers across the country and get insights into how they're making on their fields. But you don't need to wait. You can just get on it. You don't need to be on the Farmer Rapid Fire to participate either. So there's all the different ways you can get a hold of us. Well, today on the program, we're going to hear from Peter Weepy Johnson, of course. He's the agronomist for RealAgriculture. He'll join us here today. We've also got Product Spotlight with Don MacDonald of G3. He'll be with us. We've got Jason Casselman of the Canola Council of Canada talking today about soil sampling specific to canola. And we've got Shaun Prager from the University of Saskatchewan as well, who's going to talk about pea aphids in lentils. So lots of stuff to discuss here today on the program. On the weekend, I was in Victoria at the end of last week. Lindsay Smith did a great job filling in, guest hosting. She does just a tremendous job when she is here. She said some very kind things on Tuesday. That was so nice of her. It was her 12th year anniversary with the company. And her and I went out for supper in Ottawa, which was fantastic. It was so much fun. And then she said some nice things on Tuesday. So I guess this is my opportunity to say we appreciate you back, Lindsay, and the 12 years you've given this company has been amazing. I can't wait to see what the next 12-year brings as well. Like I mentioned, we were in Victoria. My wife and I were at a meeting. Yeah, Victoria, beautiful. We stayed at the Empress Hotel, which I definitely recommend to a lot of you out there. Some of the old CPR hotels, even though the railway doesn't go there. But there was there were ships that the CPR owned at one time that would bring in people into Canada, and beautiful, beautiful hotel built in the early 1900s. Highly recommend it. Now, bring your wallet or your purse, and a bigger one at that. But definitely one of the nice one of the historical, beautiful hotels in Canada. And the odd ghost story as well, if you're into that. But Victoria, definitely, I haven't been there for a long time, but definitely a beautiful city in Canada. So highly encourage any of you to do that. But back to reality now. Yep, back to reality. And we have a mixed set of weather conditions. Ontario looks beautiful. We got some rain going through parts of Western Canada. That's not very well timed when it comes to harvest, but we will make do as best as possible. Well, let's take a break. And when we come back, we are going to dig in with Peter Weepy Johnson. We got lots of stuff to discuss with the wild man himself.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety, enhanced weed control, and a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
time for a product spotlight with the Canadian Canola Growers Association. We're joined now by Dave Gallant. Who is CCGA and why are we talking about cash advance?
Well, the Canadian Canola Growers Association has been around for 40 years. The cash advance program itself has been around for over 50 years. It gives farmers access to cash flow for their inventory without having to sell. Big benefits of the program: the first $250,000 this year is interest-free, and CCGA offers the program on over 50 different products. So we do all the grains and oilseeds, livestock, so cattle, bison, hogs, goats, as well as honey. This program you only pay as you deliver your product. So there's no monthly payments scheduled. You pay when you have cash flow from your product. And the third big advantage, the only collateral, especially at this time of the year, is the grain itself.
How do they learn more? How do they get started?
Well, the easiest way is you can go to ccga.ca. If you really want to understand it, you can call us at our 1-800 number, 1-866-745-2256.
Let's get rolling with Agronomic Monday here on RealAg Radio. I'm joined by Peter Pete Johnson. Hey, Pete, how's it going?
Man, Shaun, how could it go any better? It's like July in Ontario. The sun shines every day. It's 28 degrees Celsius. It's just for the middle of September, it is phenomenal weather. I just don't know how people could not be happy with all this sunshine.
Well, Lindsay was complaining to me this morning. She said it's too hot. Where was this? She's like, this is like July. She's like, I'm prepared for cooler weather. It's like, come on, let's take the nice weather while we can get it.
Well, especially because all summer we've fought rain, rain, rain.
Yeah.
And so now we're really starting to ramp up harvest. Silage harvest is underway, soybean, edible bean harvest. And it would be really nice for a change to harvest under good soil conditions. So from that perspective, we should not complain about this weather. Plus, lots of sunshine. Hopefully, we're finishing the corn crop off with lots of high test weight, packing that photosynthate into the kernels. Pretty small kernels, actually, Shaun, in a lot of fields that I look at. So I think that is a function of the earlier weather. We just didn't set up for big kernels, but let's at least pack as much as we can into those smaller kernels and make the bushels, every bushel possible.
Yeah, it could be some recency bias, but I tend to think that it seems like September, October can be the two most beautiful months of the year, which seems, we think July, August all the time, but I think a lot of times it's this time of the year that you really get the really nice weather when the kids are back at school. Hey, Pete, MMP reminds you that you're farming, Pete. You got to pay attention to this, okay? The initial deadline to submit your 2023 agri-stability form without penalty is September 30th. That's in 2 weeks, okay? Visit mmp.ca today to connect with an agriculture risk management advisor. I know what Pete's doing after the show's over here. He's going to mmp.ca, and so should you. Pete, we're talking about yields there, and you're talking about small kernels. Definitely been hearing about that from some of our Western Canadian audience as well. And I've been saying this for numerous weeks here, but the anecdotal qualitative sample of farmers we've been talking to in the Farmer Rapid Fire on Thursdays have been saying, here's my expectation. Yields are under. Like we're just not doing what I thought we would. And I dialed back my expectations because it was so hot in July. And we're still not getting there. It's one of those years where it woulda, coulda, shoulda. And there's not much shoulda because I don't know what we could have done differently because Mother Nature just didn't come through. But the yields are a little bit disappointing compared to where we thought we were going to be in the middle of June.
Yeah, and so Shaun, you have to be careful because there are definitely areas that do not fit that mold. So I have clients kind of in that Cinderella zone. That's what I'll call it, the Cinderella zone. If I get into my part of the farming area in Ontario, so London and north of London, south of London, that area, man, we got pounded with rainfall, pounded and pounded and pounded. And I talked to a grower on Sunday, had a big field of cranberry beans. He said 48 acres out of that field were drowned out.
Whoa.
It's an insurance claim. Where the beans were good, they were decent, but too much drowned out. Meanwhile, if I go further north, there are clients up in that Bruce Peninsula that it's been so dry that they've cried for rain almost all summer. They got some timely rains, but now the canola isn't emerging. Like they need rain. But if you're in the Cinderella zone in between, I have like 3,300 pound edible beans, 3,000 pound cranberry beans. There are some really outstanding yields when we get just in between where they got enough moisture, but not so much they drown things out. So there are some good crops, but in general terms, yeah, some real disappointments as we get into the edible bean crops and it's excess moisture for the most part.
Yeah. Now we're talking about the heat in Ontario this week. That's having an impact on the dry down of the crops for sure.
Yeah, so same client with the 48 acres that got drowned out. Crans got down to 13% moisture. Remember, the harvest moisture for crans is 18%.
Ooh, that's a little dry.
They are a large seeded bean, and quality is everything. And as they get over dry in that harvest process, you are cracking seed coats. You crack seed coats, now they pick those beans, and so it's a real challenge to be there on time. I talked to a grower in Michigan. He was harvesting 9% soybeans, 9% soybeans, and the stems are still green. And so, again, that Michigan area.
What's going on there? It's just it's the top just dried and it just got way ahead of the stems, or what happened?
So they've been super dry all season. They've got a solid soybean crop, 50 to 60 bushels, but on a really good year, they would be 60 to 70, maybe, even break 70 occasionally. So the bean yields are sort of average or maybe a tad below average, but they've been dry all summer. And so what happens is that the bean plant just didn't have the moisture to fill those seeds, to fill the grain, like the kernels or the beans in the pods. So they're smaller beans than they should be. And so there's just photosynthate left. He says there's even the odd green leaf hanging on plants because they just had nowhere to put that photosynthate. And he says a lot of his neighbors aren't running yet because they look and say, oh, the too many green stems, we're not going to roll. Yeah. And meanwhile, the beans are at 9%. So don't forget, beans 13%, soybeans 13% moisture is dry. At 9%, you're losing 4.4% of your yield because of that reduced moisture. Every 1% that you lose in moisture is 1.1% in yield. It's weird how the math works out. But on a 50 bushel crop, you take away 4%. That's 2 bushels per acre. That's a pretty big deal, Shaun.
Well, talk about edible beans. On Saturday, I was at a meeting in Victoria, and lunch was a brick of tofu.
Okay, tofu is soybeans, right? And so they are edible beans, but we don't really class them as edible beans. We would say those were IP, identity preserved soybeans.
They're IP beans. Sorry, yes, you're right. Yes.
And by the way, my sister would love that. She loves tofu. I haven't got my taste buds haven't quite got there yet.
Whoa. Let's just and listen. It's fine. It's actually a very economical source of protein.
Yeah, nutritious. Yeah,
absolutely. So taste very much not part of the equation.
Yeah, taste zero, nutrition.
Yeah, but these I've had little cubes like put in a salad and like whatever. But these were like bricks. Like they were. I wouldn't say steak size at all, but they were like half a chicken breast. That was I don't know, not my thing, but they were they're good for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's people listening, Shaun, that are shaking their heads at both of us because they love tofu and an acquired taste, or my sister would say that it's what you put with it, that the tofu will take on the flavor of the things you put with it. And so
that's just people trying to convince themselves it's good. That's what that is. That's what people say. They're trying to convince themselves.
Shaun, there are cultures that survive on tofu. It can't be all I'm sure there's ways to make it good. And and I just am not there yet. So
Well,
and
hey,
apparently neither are you.
yeah, we'll send your best tofu recipe to shaney@realagriculture.com. We'll see how many of those we get. We'll see. We'll see. Hey, decision making on when to seed your wheat. That's a bit of a thing in Ontario right now.
And so actually and people should go, we put out a new wheat school, Bern Tobin and I, last Thursday, the 5 top tips for planting wheat this fall. But we're actually early. We have the chance to plant wheat early after some of these edible beans, after sweet corn, after some sugar beet harvest, and even now after early soybean harvest. The challenge becomes, Shaun, how deep do you plant? So I think I've had at least 10 calls in the last 4 days about, Pete, like, what do I do? It's super dry. I can't find moisture. And what's really interesting is in a lot of these situations, they've harvested things wet prior to the wheat crop. So this isn't true of the soybean harvest. We're dry now. And so then it becomes, am I on heavy clay soil? I take the soybeans off. I've already dried out the top 3 inches. And so that's sort of my rule of thumb. If I can find moisture up to 3 inches deep and I can plant into moisture, I'll go that deep. If I can't find it at 3 inches, I'm planting at 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches, and I'm hoping for rain. But then the question becomes, what seeding rate do I use? And so I really back up and say, man, look at your optimum planting date. And so if you're 10 days, 2 weeks ahead of your optimum planting date, wait and watch the weather forecast, because you can get caught, man, Shaun. If all of a sudden the weather forecast changes and we get 3 inches of rain, and now I'm planting on November the 10th, and I could have planted on September the 17th, I should have planted on September the 17th, even though it was too early. But as long as there's no rain in the forecast, it's kind of wait and see, because the further along I get, the higher the seeding rate I'm going to use. If I plant too early, 10 days ahead of my optimum planting date, and that's today, and it start growing today, so I can find moisture at 3 inches, man, I'm at 1 million seeds per acre. And I will tell you, Shaun, one of the toughest jobs I have as a consulting agronomist is to convince my clients that have moisture not to seed 1.5 million seeds per acre, because that's just what they always do. But it's 28 degrees. If I put it into moisture at 2 inches deep, it's going to be up in 7 days. And it's going to get so much top, so much growth, I'm going to take less yield. So the way you manage that is to reduce your seeding rate. But that is such a hard concept for growers, and I get it, right? Like if 1 is good, 1.5 should be better. But it's not.
It's sort of like when I'm taking Advil, right? If it says 1, you just double it.
Right. You just take 2. What the heck, right? No, yeah. So it is a real challenge in terms of get the wheat in the ground if you can at all find moisture. If you can't, then you got to back up, watch the weather forecast, and make a decision when to plant. But make sure you get it in the ground before the 3-inch gusher. If it's a 1/2 inch, you can wait and plant after, or just plant right before it and get that wheat going. But because seeding rate is so tied to seeding date, it really does complicate that decision.
You know, I pulled up the weather forecast for Saskatoon. Okay, just as an example, they got a chance of rain on Tuesday, like almost 100% chance on Wednesday. So there's some moisture, untimely, with harvest, but opportunity when it comes to something like hybrid fall rye, winter wheat, something to maybe consider. Think about this past season. Yeah. Right? We had all that moisture at the beginning. You would have had your crop in. You get off to that. You'd launch. You're kind of giving yourself a bit of an advantage potentially. I know it's not exactly like standard operating procedure. We just don't. Most people go the spring wheat route, but something maybe to consider if you do have some moisture.
Yeah, absolutely. The winter crops, whether it's winter wheat, fall rye, winter barley, they all use that early season moisture better, because they're growing when it's there. And typically that can give you an advantage. Not always. And in Western Canada, winter survival is always an issue. But I'll tell you, you go to Eastern Ontario, and they used to always be spring wheat because the winter wheat would not survive. Now that the climate has changed, they've got better drainage. They can get winter wheat to survive. Winter wheaters there are just going straight line up because winter wheat out yields and just spreads the workload. Lots of good things from that perspective. Hey, by the way, I've had those questions about seeding depth, seeding rate, all the way from Montana through to New York State. So it is the time that those questions are being asked.
Yeah, good stuff. And of course, Wheat School is a great resource. You can go to wheatschool.com. It's brought to you by Alberta Grain, C&M Seeds, and Syngenta Canada. Hey, for agronomically effective dual UAN inhibition, the smart answer is Tribune Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how its 2 active ingredients protect UAN from 3 forms of nitrogen loss, visit kochag.ca. Pete, it's been great chatting with you. Thanks so much for joining us here on this Monday. Stay out of trouble, okay, bud?
Yeah, you as well. And yeehaw harvest, man. Get her done.
Get her done. Safely. Safely.
Yes, safe.
Okay, we're going to be right back on RealAg Radio here on Agronomic Monday. We've got a product spotlight coming up with G3 right after this.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
We got a product spotlight with Kate Hyatt, the marketing portfolio lead for DeKalb. Let's talk about the DeKalb Coat of Farms.
Coat of Farms is an initiative to celebrate the partnership between DeKalb Seed and the farmers that are choosing it. The way that Coat of Farms works, it's a farmer-driven, artificial intelligence enhanced line of DeKalb swag. So it's an interface on an iPad or on your phone or your computer. You answer a series of questions that help drill down to what represents you. And then a 3D rendered jacket gets created.
So how long does this go on for?
That's a great question. So contest runs from August 27th through to October 15th. After October 15th, there's going to be a contest where 10 of the coats will be available to be won through draws and from the people that participated.
That is great. DeKalbCoatOfFarms.ca.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio. I am Lindsay Smith, and joining me now for today's product spotlight is Don MacDonald. He's the VP of Operations for G3. Welcome here, Don.
Yeah, well, good morning, Lindsay, and thanks for inviting me to your podcast.
All right, we are, of course, into the thick of another harvest season. How is G3 delivering on its vision of building a smarter path from farmers' fields to global markets today?
Yeah, well, G3 is now, as of this year, 9 years old, still a relatively young company compared to other grain companies. In the last year, we have managed to build our last 2 elevators in Rycroft and Melfort. With the build out of those last 2 elevators, we've increased our footprint in Western Canada to become one of the larger grain handlers in Western Canada. This enables us to essentially cover the prairies from the Ontario border all the way to the mountains to make sure we can service our customers. It enables us to handle the grain that our customers need to move quickly from farm to our vessels in Vancouver. Part of our vision at G3, because we are a relatively new organization, we had the ability to take a look at what Western Canada needed, what farmers in Western Canada need to enable them to move grain as efficiently as possible from their farm to end-use customers. That we put together a operating model that's called a loop-to-loop power-on operating model, where we're the only grain company in Canada that has loop tracks in the country and a loop track in Vancouver that helps us move grain in a very fast and efficient manner with what we call a power-on model, where the locomotives stay attached to the train. What does this mean? It means that we move grain faster. It means farmers can move their grain quicker and get more delivery opportunities. So, those 60 new loop track elevators along with the couple of ladder track facilities that we have, allows us to move grain to Vancouver. And currently we're breaking records at how fast we can move grain and how quick we can load vessels. So I'd say that our vision, building a smarter path from farmers' field to the global market, has been realized, and that realization feeds back to farmers, providing them with more delivery opportunities.
Now, what other unique advantages does G3 offer farmers during this incredibly busy time of year?
Yeah, for sure. Busy time of year for farmers this time of year right now through to the new year. Looks like a large crop coming across most of the prairies, and that means farmers are going to have to market their crops out there. Over the last few years, we've developed a new online portal system called G3 Smart Cell, which allows farmers to market their grain, monitor their prices, set targets, contract grain at a time that suits them. These guys are busy, from sun up to sundown, so lots of times they need to have the ability to use these tools either early in the morning or late at night. So our online marketing portal, G3 Smart Cell, enables them to do that. They can also connect directly with one of our reps, too, and work with the portal to review samples, to get advice, to lock in competitive marketing, and just learn how to better be able to use that technology to help them market their grain. So not only are we trying to move grain fast, but we're trying to find ways to make it more easy for farmers to market their grain, to get paid for their grain. We now offer in half of last year's direct deposits, and enables them to get paid a little bit quicker as well, too. So, time is money, and we're trying to find ways either through, fast, efficient facilities and online tools to help farmers do, a faster and more efficient way of doing their business with G3.
Now, and what have you heard, or what are you hearing from Canadian farmers who do business with G3?
That's an interesting question. We just recently completed a survey with all our farmers in Western Canada, which we do annually to try to find out what we can do to improve our business. And some of the things that came back to us, and I wouldn't say we're surprised, but we're glad to hear is that they say it's easy to work with G3. Some of the things I explained around the efficiencies and online tools, is they're very easy to work with. They definitely appreciate the level of trust and customer service that we've developed at our facilities with our staff. That comes across loud and clear. It's an important part of the relationship we have with our growers, and just to help that their FBRs give to farmers on working with tools like Smart Cell. One thing we hear all the time from farmers, from truckers, from third-party truckers, is our speed of unloading at the elevator. We can unload Super Bs in less than 5 minutes at our facilities, and faster speeds mean more unloads per day for farmers, and more grain getting moved and more efficient. And that comes across loud and clear. So, I'd say those are kind of the key things that we're hearing from farmers. Easy to do work with us, and speed, and just the overall relationship.
All right. And now, you've highlighted a lot of the key differences for G3. For someone who's considering, maybe for the first time, delivering and dealing with G3, what advice would you have for them?
I'd say give us a try. You won't know until you actually get in there to try our facilities, our tools. Try our G3 Smart Cell tool. See how easy it is to work with. If you need help, feel free to reach out to our staff to help you utilize that tool and deliver some grain, contract some grain, and just come and see what it's like to deliver our facilities. How our staff work with you. How fast we get things done, how quickly you can come in and deliver loads. I think really until you get to experience the G3 advantage, you really won't know. So I say, just give us a try.
Alrighty. And you're right. Time is money. Speed matters, especially in this busy harvest season. So Don MacDonald, VP of Operations with G3, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thanks, Lindsay, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. We'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Whether you're in a career within an organization, starting your own business, looking for your dream job, running your own farm operation, operating a company in ag or food, or want to hone your overall life skills, this conference is for you. Celebrating over 10 years of bringing women in ag together, join the Advancing Women Conference in Niagara Falls on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. Visit advancingwomenconference.ca for more information and to register.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. You know, the answer to your above-ground nitrogen loss problem? Well, it's Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anvil's dual active ingredients deliver extended protection, visit kochag.ca. Well, we're going to now dive into a recent Canola School episode. You can find all of our Canola School episodes by going to canolaschool.com. The Canola School is brought to you by BASF Canada, as well as Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Hi, I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I am here today with Jason Casselman of the Canola Council of Canada, and we've been talking about soil sampling, and soil sampling in canola particularly. So why don't you just kind of go into a little bit of what kind of soil sampling is currently being done on average, and what direction you see the need going?
Yeah, you bet. So, you know, for the most part, in the past, we've been doing a lot of composite soil sampling, where we're taking a sample from the whole field and putting it into the bucket, and then taking a sample of that bucket and sending it to the lab. You know, and for the most part, I think, you know, we started doing random sampling, but with the advent of being able to use GPS coordinates, we were pinpointing, taking those samples from the same spots in the field, but still doing a composite sample. But one of the things that we're starting to see with growers is those that are doing more intensive soil sampling. So instead of mixing all of that into the bucket and sending it to the lab, they're actually taking a sample from that spot, and it's going to be a few cores in that spot. So stop the truck, jump out, take a spot from each side of the truck, and use that as your sample and send it to the lab. So instead of having one composite sample that's got 16 cores in the bucket, we would actually have 16 samples from that quarter section. And then you're GPS mapping that area out so that you know exactly where that was taken from, right? Yeah, because then what that gives us the opportunity is to correlate that to yield. So if we've got a soil sample point and we've got a yield point, we can actually see is there something about that part of the field that's either contributing to yield, or is it something in that soil sample that's going to identify a limiting factor to our yield potential. Because we know the whole field got the same amount of water, the whole field got the same amount of sunshine, but what is the difference in that soil? And there are factors, obviously. There's going to be compaction, there's going to be drainage, there's going to be, you know, a whole other list of things. But if we can find out if it is a soil fertility issue, do we have the opportunity to fix it? Or how do we manage something that we've measured? Because you were saying that the target yield is 52 bushels per acre, typically, right? As you guys have gone out and done samples like this, are you seeing that it makes a really big difference from a production standpoint? Yeah, so what we're seeing, you know, a farmer is going to pick that yield target, and whether it's 52 bushels or more or less, he's going to have that number of what that yield target is going to be. But what we've seen is that when you start looking at combine yield data, there is a tremendous amount of variation in the field. And so we've got parts of that field that, you know, we've on average, we've said we want it to get 52 bushels to the acre, but we're getting 60, but we might only be getting 35. And with that fertility that we've applied, but if we can pinpoint or find out why is that part of the field yielding 60, and why is part of that field only running at 35, and is it a fertility issue, and can we start to improve some of that base fertility that's in that soil with a balanced fertility program. So we're feeding the crop based on yield target, but parts of that field are going to have a lot higher yield target than just an average number. Than others. And then how many samples would you recommend growers take throughout the course of a field? So that's where the balance of time and money comes into play. And so if we have if we can take at least 16 spots on a quarter, that's one for 10 acres. You know, that's within the budget for some growers for the most part. Ideally, it would be awesome to take one sample for every acre. Right. But, you know, logistically and money-wise, there is a limit on what it takes. And you don't have to do all your fields every year. Some of the more intensive soil sampling could be done on a couple of fields to identify some of the challenges, identify some opportunities. If it's land that you own, and you want to make the investment of improving the fertility, there's an opportunity to try to build up some of that. If it's land that you're renting, you have a different strategy of how you're going to manage fertility on that farm.
For sure. And then is there a certain time of year or times in the year that producers should be going out and soil sampling?
Yeah, I think for the most part, after the crop comes off, after harvest time is generally a good time to take soil samples. Generally, as the soil cools down, we have a lower amount of biology active in the soil. So some of those nutrients, like nitrogen, that are going to be changed based on the biology of the soil, they start to slow down and stabilize. So in the fall is a good time, but for growers any time of the year, if they're out taking some soil samples, to me it's always going to give you a little extra information or a little bit more value, and that could be another opportunity too, is taking samples throughout the growing season, and seeing how do those levels change, or how does it impact how your crop is growing. So, but for the standard practice, I think taking a sample in the fall after harvest.
And then you were talking about the nutrient ratios as well. So can you go into that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah, so what we've seen, that growers that are kind of correlating that soil sample data point plus a yield point in that where that sample was taken, and they're trying to figure out what is actually contributing to yield. Some of the growers are starting to see that there's an interaction between the ratio of phosphorus to zinc or phosphorus to copper, or maybe even a potassium to magnesium ratio. So we know that there are some interactions there, and if we've got that in the right balance or the right ratio, does that actually impact yield? And can we see that with when we've got yield numbers and soil sample numbers together?
Right. And so are there more studies being done on that, on the correct ratios? Because I think a lot of the time you think, okay, well, we need this nutrient in there, and it's kind of flat, right? So yeah, are there studies being done on those ratios and what works best for canola? Yeah, I think in canola right now, with fertility studies on that, it's probably something that is a bit of an opportunity for growers to do research on their own, and because it's something that growers can, if they've got yield information from that combine yield monitor data that they might have sitting there, they've collected all this data, what do you do with it? Right. Why not start putting layers of maps together? So if we got a yield map and a soil sample map and put them together, and what is it actually showing us, or what can you start to learn from what's happening in the field? One thing that we didn't mention is the opportunity of using satellite imagery to look at that variability across the field, and that can almost be a yield prediction map based on satellite imagery, because where those good spots are versus some of the spots that might need more attention. Right. And do you know where growers can go to get satellite images of their farms? A lot of companies provide satellite imagery for a fee, or working with an agronomist who has subscription to satellite imagery services, and it's super cheap. You can buy satellite imagery, daily satellite imagery now for across Western Canada. And so finding it for your field and digging into what is actually showing up before the combine hits the field is a really nice way of managing some of the variability that we're seeing, but also to improve areas of the farm that might need it. Right. That's incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Real Agriculture. And that was Jason Casselman.
And like I mentioned earlier, you can find more episodes like this by going to canolaschool.com, brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio. It's Agronomic Monday, and we'll be right back right after this.
At Vatterstad, we aim to be the world's leading partner for outstanding emergence. We're doing that through innovative tillage, planting, and seeding equipment that's optimized for your field conditions and soil types. We also offer industry-leading capacities to help you get the job done in shorter windows of time. It's all designed to give your crop the best start possible so you can maximize yields. Vatterstad, we look forward to growing together.
Featuring dual active ingredients NBPT and pronitridine, Tribune provides consistent protection both above and below ground in one convenient formulation. NBPT defends against ammonia volatilization, while the patented second active ingredient, pronitrogene, safeguards nutrients from denitrification and leaching. Learn how Tribune can bring greater flexibility and protection to your operation by visiting tribunestabilizer.ca.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Hey, I'm really looking forward to this week. It is we have so much harvest going on and numbers coming in. You know, you don't wait till Thursdays where we do the Farmer Rapid Fire, where we kind of hear how people are making out in their fields. You can get the jump on it. Send me an email. I want to hear about how you're making out. It is shaney@realagriculture.com. Hey, this segment's brought to you by the Pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here. You can go to pioneer.com/Canada to find out more. And Optimum Gly, also the sponsor of last year's Agritechnica coverage as well. Well, now we're going to hear from Shaun Prager with the University of Saskatchewan. It's a recent Pulse School episode that is brought to you by BSF Canada. And in this Pulse School episode, which you can always find Pulse Schools at pulseschool.com, by the way. But in this episode, they're talking about pea aphids. Pests. Pesky little buggers. And we're going to talk about that. Here's Amber Bell.
Hi, I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture. I am standing here today with Shaun Prager, who is a professor of plant sciences at the University of Saskatchewan. And we're going to do a pulse school today. We're going to be talking about pea aphids, specifically in lentils, but I think that some of this information will cross over to other pulses. So welcome, Shaun. It's fantastic to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, so pea aphids in lentils. Do you want to kind of go in depth, like just give us some background on how they might impact lentils?
Sure. So pea aphids, like most aphids, have two life stages. They can be sexually reproducing. We don't typically care about in pea aphids in crops. And then they can be parthenogenic. So parthenogenic means they are females and they're only females, and then they give live birth essentially to more females that are already pregnant when they give birth. So if you think of Russian nesting dolls, that's the analogy we usually use. That's what it's like. So you just keep getting more and more and more aphids, and because of that, their population sizes can grow very quickly because they don't have to have eggs and they don't have to develop very long before they can already reproduce.
Right, and that kind of brings us into the thresholds. And you were talking about how the thresholds they change depending on how many days until you're going to spray, and it changes quite drastically, right?
That's right. Because the time from when you sample till when you actually take action is time in which these insects can increase their population size. And because their population size can increase quite rapidly, depending on the conditions, you need to adjust the threshold you use to when you're going to take action. So if you're going to spray tomorrow, you can let the aphid population be larger than if you are, before you make a decision, than if you're going to spray a week from now. Because in the time between when you've counted and when you would spray, that's 6 or 7 days, that's 6 or 7 days that the population is going to increase. And so a lot of the economic thresholds, certainly the ones for lentils that are now available, account for that time between when you make a decision and when you can actually take action.
Right, and the thresholds are different depending on the region that you're in, correct?
That's right. Because of the thresholds need to account for the market value of what you're growing, and then also because of the insects' growth rates, which varies in different regions, and because the varieties grown are different. All of that affects the rate at which the insects increase in population size, and they also affect the value of the actual crop you're growing. And so those two factors go into the thresholds, and so because they don't remain the same in different places, you need thresholds that are sort of specific to where you are.
Okay, so talking about economic thresholds, I mean, realistically, what it comes down to is what producers are experiencing in the field. So what environmental conditions are a hazard when producers should get out there and start scouting because it's a risk? So
there's several. So the lesser one, but that's worth considering, is precipitation. So generally speaking, we think aphids will like happier plants, that is, ones that are healthier, so more rain. So if you get rain, you're probably going to have more aphid problems than if you have a dry year. In fact, one of the ways we often talk about it and tell people think about it is that wet years mean aphids and disease, dry years mean grasshoppers.
Right.
Now, the other one, and probably the more important one, is temperature. So the warmer the temperature is, up to a point, the more quickly the aphids will reproduce, and so the more aphids you'll get and the more generations you'll get in a given period of time. There's a cap to that. The cap seems to be around 30 degrees. So when you get somewhere between 30 and 35, it's too hot for them and then they will start dying. But when you're below that, say, 30 mark, when you're in the sort of the high 20s, you'll actually get is a very, very fast reproduction. So if you're seeing aphids and it's very warm, you can assume that the populations are going to increase very rapidly. If you see them and it's cool, 15, 20 degrees, you probably have a lot longer before you have to worry because they're just not going to reproduce at the same rate.
Right, and they travel a fair bit. We were talking about rotation and, so can you speak to some of that, how they travel and why, what some of the factors are in deciding on management? Yeah,
so aphids are funny because in addition to being sexual and non-sexual forms, they also have winged and unwinged forms. So the wingless forms we don't typically expect to move very much because they don't have wings. But what happens is then they get wings, and when they get wings, they can fly.
Right.
And that flight, for us, unfortunately, here in Western Canada, means two things. It means they can either fly from places in the United States up into Canada. It can also mean that they can fly from one crop to another. So here that can mean flying off of things like alfalfa or red clover, where they might be overwintering, that might be where the eggs are, or where they just might be reproducing, so they can fly off of those things into your crops and you start getting crops. But it also means that they'll move from crop to crop. And what we often expect to happen is that they will start on peas and then they will move into lentils and then eventually into fava bean.
So if you see them in your pea field, and you have lentils nearby,
you should be looking at your lentils. Exactly. Yes, right. Because we would expect that, especially if you have large numbers in your peas, as the peas start to senesce, they're going to move into the lentils. Okay. Right. So what they're really following, and anyone that grows these things knows that, right? They're basically following what your harvest schedule is, right? As they mature, they're moving from the very early maturing pulses into the later maturing pulses because they're greener and happier.
So how exactly do aphids damage plants? What does that damage look like, Shaun?
There are three different ways, maybe, that we expect aphids to damage plants, or at least to lentils. The most important, at least right now, is direct feeding. So the aphids feed on the plant and they take the sap away that loads the nutrients, and that can cause all sorts of things. It can cause premature senescence, so they'll senesce early. It can cause smaller pods, it can cause less pods, it can cause less podding, it can cause less seed, all kinds of things like that. It can cause wilting, and in an extremely bad cases, it will actually cause plant death. The second is that when the aphids feed, they produce aphid waste. We call it honeydew. It's basically aphid poop, and because it's very sugary, it can lead to sooty molds on your plants. So if you have very high aphid numbers, you also get sooty molds, and sooty molds cause sort of the problems that sooty molds do, which includes reduced photosynthesis and things like that. The third problem of aphids is that aphids are vectors, and so they transmit viruses. In Western Canada, we don't typically think very much about viral pathogens in our crops. But in other parts of the world, especially other lentil growing parts of the world, and that includes both Australia and in the Middle East, more than half, sometimes the majority of the loss that you experience is actually from viruses. We have some of those viruses at least in Saskatchewan. We just don't know the extent to which we have them or the amount of damage they're doing.
Is there research happening on the viruses and how much of that's impacting producers and the bottom line?
There is. It's early stages because it's just starting to become something that we're aware of. And so we're still at the part where we're looking to see if they're there and developing the different testing methods to confirm what we have and to sort of identify what some of the symptoms look like and sort of those very basic pieces of information. But some of those are what you need in order to get further along and will help us get an idea of how much damage we really are getting from these viruses that are being transmitted by these aphids in the pulses. And we expect that they're going to get worse because as you get more aphids, you typically get more viruses that the aphids transmit. And
right.
We've been seeing worse aphid years every year for the last 3 or 4 years.
Well, and as you mentioned, with the way that they breed, it's it's not necessarily a problem that's going to just go away on it.
That's right. And unfortunately, it also means that the tools we have changed because Not all insecticides are effective in controlling a virus the same way as they are controlling the insects themselves. It's a different problem. And not all thresholds and injury limits, in fact, most are designed with viruses in mind. They're designed for this this direct feeding. And so what you can tolerate in terms of damage is very different when you're worrying about a plant getting sick and that being the problem versus when you're worried about the number of insects feeding on the plant.
Actual physical damage.
Yeah.
Okay. And are there any varieties, is there any breeding happening that helps with resistance to aphids?
In Western Canada, no. So there are resistant varieties to pea aphid in lentils. None of those are the varieties that we grow in Western Canada. None of those are the varieties that are adapted to Western Canada. The closest you would become is a couple of the American varieties. There's ongoing work to do that. My lab is doing a lot of that work, but we are years away from having any varieties that have those traits in them. And that applies to both lentil and to pea. We just don't have those traits yet in the varieties we have.
So what would you recommend to producers that are experiencing problems with pea aphids?
Well, the first thing I write is the standards. Is use your thresholds. So use the thresholds. They're available. They're on my website. They're in other places. Use the thresholds. Use those to make your decisions. Don't spray until you see those thresholds. The natural enemies do a good job in the pea aphids when there are not too many of them, and you don't want to harm those. And then the other thing is rotate your modes of action. There are different insecticides that you can use to control pea aphids, and there is at least potentially resistance to some of the more commonly used ones, and so you don't want to rely on those, A, because you don't want more resistance, and B, because they may not always work. So it is worth rotating your modes of action, particularly if you have really heavy pea aphid pressure and you're concerned about it. They are sometimes more expensive. Okay. But in fact, the thresholds that are available actually account for insecticide costs, so you can even adjust to the different insecticide costs. So it is worth it, and some of the more expensive insecticides that are available are also better on beneficials, so there's a benefit there where it might work. So it's not anything particularly unusual. It's really the same things we tell you all the time, and unfortunately, it's just that a lot of the other cultural controls and things that we might tell you to use aren't terribly effective given the sort of the acreage of pulse crops we grow here. Yeah.
And how much of a problem is resistance to insecticides?
We don't know, and therein is the problem. So this year in particular, there's been a lot of reports of people spraying, especially pyrethroid insecticides, and them not working. We're not sure if that actually is the case or not, but we're sort of doing those surveys right now, so we're trying to figure that out. Unfortunately, we're not sure we're going to have an answer in time for this season. Hopefully we'll have a little bit more information for future seasons, but it's known that pea aphids can get resistance to at least to pyrethroids, so it's a very valid concern, if not one that we know for sure is the case now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us on Real Agriculture, and that was Shaun Prager on this episode of Fall School.
If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the Real Ag feedback line. That number is easy. It is 855-776-6147. You dial that number, you press the number 3. And the best part is you just leave me a message. You don't even have to be on the radio live. You just leave me a voicemail. I want to get your perspectives, your thoughts, your comments, your questions, your suggestions, your takes. Even hot takes are great. And like I said at the beginning of the segment, love to hear how you are making out when it comes to harvest time. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. And, of course, we will chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Breck Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.